Okay, so Jacob and Jim, thanks for joining me today. We just got done watching an Apple event, Spring Loaded. What were your first reactions from that event coming out of it?
I'll go first here. Well, for mine, it was a 1 hour event. It was a bit like watching an infomercial compared to the old Steve Jobs days when he was. There's always a feeling that when you're doing something live, that you have the feeling that there's a potential for a blue screen, which occasionally happened, or the Wi-Fi doesn't work. This was slick. It was pre-recorded. It was almost like watching a Super Bowl commercial sometimes, minus the game.
Yes, there were times where I was like, okay, I want that action movie back when they did those clips. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was as a very slick, and the production quality was top notch, but it didn't feel spontaneous.
Mhm. Yeah, I just say for myself, I definitely felt kind of coming out of it as far as the products that were previewed a little bit womp. Nothing was really shocking to me, but at the same time, I could see myself fitting in certain products like the AirTags. This is an entirely new device that we're seeing from Apple this year. It's essentially a rival to Tile, which is those little tiny squares that you might attach to anything that you've lost before, keys, pets, whatever you name it. Jacob, what do you think about this new product offering from Apple?
Well, as a consumer, I'm happy because I lose stuff, and so it's always nice. I've certainly used Find My AirPods before, and I've used Find My Phone before. So if I can also find my keys and find my wallet and find my dog, that would be great too. So I like that. I think it's interesting when we look at the how they deal with batteries and their look at that. So I'm happy to talk about that too. But from a consumer perspective, first, I'm really happy with this product.
Yeah, I've always been a fan of Tile. I got one for a present a couple of years ago, and I had it on my keys. I am notorious for misplacing my keys. And following a couple of Christmases ago, we were putting all of our Christmas stuff away, and somehow my keys slid into a box that was about to go into storage for the summer. And we used the Tile app to find my keys. I don't know if I would have ever found them to this day if it wasn't for Tile. So I became a kind of a big fan of the usefulness of it, and actually could see how it works in real life. And so I think it's actually a very cool app, and I think Apple does a pretty nifty job with it.
Do you see any qualms about the device yet, Jim?
Well, my first impression was this big brother feeling, and what I the feeling I get is they went through extensive lengths with encryption and hashing to make sure that not even Apple can tie you to your devices. So as long as you believe them on that, I think it's pretty good that it's not going to be used for any kind of location tracking of people, but it can be of phones or keys or luggage. So in that case, I think it's kind of a nice feature, and I think a lot of people are going to take advantage of it.
Well, Jim, they're already tracking people if they want to, right? I mean, we carry our phones everywhere, so they've already crossed that threshold. And I think that Tim Cook has gone to extensive lengths, even lambasting Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook for how they use data for commercial gains. So, at the end of the day, I think Tim Cook is pretty clear that they don't want to use private data for commercial gains, but he's one CEO, and we know the CEO of Apple will not always be Tim Cook, and I think that begs a different question. But I was thinking privacy too, for sure.
So, Jacob, for the AirTag, we do have an interesting little tidbit on battery life, and you mentioned that you do have some thoughts on it. What are they?
Yeah, so it's definitely a permanent battery or a replaceable battery, so something that you have to replace. So according to the product launch, it lasts for over 1 year using regular use, which I think they test that to be 4 audio notifications a day and 1 precision find a day. So it seems like pretty rigorous usage. So even though Jim dropped his keys into his summer storage container, I don't think you do that every day. So I think the battery will last a pretty long time. That being said, they are not waterproof, which is interesting to me. And I am wondering if the reason that they're only water resistant and not waterproof is because they have to make those battery doors accessible for replacement. Tile does it differently. Tile does a replacement program. So if you're getting to end of life on the battery for Tile, you have to send your tiles in, and then they send you new ones, and then they try to replace those for environmental benefits, and try to be more responsible about it. So it's a different approach. But I have a wireless power company here, and I think that these should be wireless. I don't see why not. You can hide the battery inside the device. You can completely seal it for waterproof reasons. And once every few months, maybe you just set it on the back of your phone for an hour. It will harvest energy from the NFC technology that's already in the phones. So I think that they can make this simpler. I think that they can make this easier. I think they can make it more durable and waterproof. But again, I'm happy with the product. I just think they can do better on the power management side.
That's fair. And I mean, the moment that it does stop working, the moment that that battery life is out, it renders the device unusable. It would be the day that my battery dies that I lose my keys, you know? So
Mhm.
that's a really fair point. I like that. All right. So another area that was really interesting this year, but it's not necessarily new, is M1 and Apple Silicon. Jim, do you mind giving us an overview and some ideas for where you think this is going to go in the future?
Well, certainly M1 or Apple is committed to the M1 processor. That's their own system on a chip that they've been driving forward. Traditionally, the early days of the Mac started with the Motorola 68,000 series processors. Eventually, they moved to Power PCs, then to Intel. Now they're driving their own direction, and it sort of makes sense if you think about it. Um, over the decade of smartphones and the way it's been growing, the big issue with processor speed is how you make a smartphone fast but also very low current consumption. That was never the drive back in the early days of the PC industry and Macintoshes. So that's finally starting to get married together now, where you're getting high performance on something that is very current drain friendly and can handle basically being put in a battery powered device. So now Apple has made the change on their Macintosh processors or Macintosh devices to put the M1 in those processors, and they made a big deal of it. It's a powerful device. I mean, I think it's what, 8 cores, 8 GPUs, 16 core neural engine, and they're promoting that it's 50% faster than previous Macs. But then they say, it still has two little fans in it, and it's just basically the new Macs are just, I think it's like a 24-inch screen, but a very thin device. It's got two small fans on it that they tout as, they said 10 dB, which I think they meant 10 dB SPL, which is basically very quiet. So the whole idea is that they're having a common family using the M1 processor across all of their devices. It's very current friendly, yet it still can gain a high level of performance. And basically they have total control of it. So it's certainly something that they're going to want to push forward. And as a result, they were highly touting it amongst both the iPad Pros as well as the Macintosh introductions today.
I think is really fascinating, Jim, when you look at just from a supply chain perspective, and that they're using this technology at a consumer launch. M1 technology is a little deep for your typical consumer audience, and Apple sometimes gets a rap for being, changing the colors like they did. They changed the colors to a purple phone today, and they're really good at that consumer-facing side. But this is deep technology, and they're freeing themselves of some of the shackles of the upstream providers in Intel and Qualcomm potentially. And giving themselves some autonomy away from having to be so dependent on those, well-established leaders in semiconductor technologies and core processors. So I think that's really fascinating as well.
Yeah, it's autonomy and also a higher degree of confidentiality on new things they're doing, that they can start putting stuff in here. They can put stuff in there years before they ultimately have to reveal that it's inside the IC. So yeah, it's something that's always been near and dear to Apple, is that total control from, silicon to final product and everything in between. So this is one more step in that direction. So in that sense, it's not a surprise.
That's an awesome point. And I think that as far as like being the average consumer, like you said, Jacob, that'll just make it even more harder to differentiate iPad or iMac or
Hmm.
whatever you end up going with.
Yeah, certainly. It's interesting they're spreading it across devices too. They're getting some scale out of this chip. And I think that it's just awesome, and it opens up more opportunities for improved design and improved user experience, which again, Apple's really legendary for their user experience.
So Jacob and Jim, we've seen M1 obviously be highlighted at this Apple event, and we've seen it in some new products. But one thing that we haven't heard or seen much about is wireless charging. And I'd like to get your takes on, does Apple Silicon, its own development of its own silicon, make development of wireless charging capabilities different? Do you think there's any considerations there that are behind the scenes?
So Jim, I have a question for you on that, so that we can answer the question for Amaya. Is the M1 mostly a digital chip, or is it like the Snapdragon is for phones, or is it something different?
I believe it to be mostly a digital chip. Yeah.
Okay. So I think that means that the M1 probably brings some opportunity, because that controls everything that happens in the phone, and happens in the iPad and happens in the computer. It's in charge of the graphics, it's in charge of the processing, the communication, and everything. But at the end of the day, wireless charging usually happens at the power management side, which is an analog part. And so I think that what we would be interested in is who's building the PMICs and who's designing those, and what kind of hooks do they have into the M1 chip. Jim, do you have any idea about who does the PMICs for Apple?
No, I don't.
Okay, no problem. But at the end of the day, I think that it really comes down to that power management side being analog. It's based on power, so these are bigger chips. They're heftier. They keep them split out for a reason. So I think the M1 chips are more akin to the brains, and the PMICs are more akin to the brawn. And maybe Apple's working on their own there as well.
All right. So one item that got a significant amount of airtime, at least in the beginning, was the Apple Card. And for a tech company that appears to be kind of creeping into the finance space, it is interesting to see. And I'm wondering if you guys had any hot takes on it or any interesting thoughts about it. Jacob?
Yeah. So it's really interesting that Steve Wozniak, one of the founders, and really the technical founder of Apple, called out Apple's algorithms on credit approval for being gender biased. So I think the story, if I remember correctly, is that he applied for credit with Apple, and so did his wife, and they have joint accounts, so there should be no actual difference between their ability to pay or their credit worthiness. And he was approved for about 10 times more credit than her. And it's because these algorithms are gender biased based on the way that they're being trained by the engineers. So I don't think there's a malice or malintent in the way that these are being trained, but it does illustrate that artificial intelligence and various mathematical models aren't just unbiased because they're math. What goes into training those determines whether they're biased or not, and whether we can build a better future than the history we have, or we're going to just repeat history but just do it through algorithms.